Hey, what's going on guys? How is everybody doing? A little over a month ago, I made my first team building guide for Razor, and while it was decent, it had many flaws. I think that it's important to stay current with the information I've gained and recognize that as we continue to play and learn Genshin Impact, our opinions and thoughts will change about certain characters and team compositions. I've certainly learned a lot over the past month and think that there are a lot of things that I either got wrong or can improve on to give you guys the most updated information that I have. So in this video, we'll be going over the teams I've found most optimized for building Razor as a main carry, from my most preferred to my least preferred. And lastly, a team that will be better suited for free-to-play players, at least as a base. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Before we look at team comps, I want to go over the core of why I think certain heroes are better than others with Razor, and that is the reactions and resonances we need to keep in mind when building a team. First, we'll look at reactions. The absolute #1 reaction, hands down, that we want is Superconduct. By mixing Cryo and Electro, we can reduce our enemy's physical damage resistance by 50%, further increasing most of Razor's damage. This is easily his best reaction, and because of this, we're going to need a really good reason not to include it. His second best reaction is Electrocharged, and the drop off from first best to second best is a lot. Electrocharge won't provide nearly as much of an overall damage increase as Superconduct, but since AoE is not a strength of Razor, it'll be a nice addition to have. The side benefit here is that as long as we're staying consistent with our first best reaction and we have a Cryo hero on our team, we'll always have access to Shatter, the hidden reaction that Razor has access to. In terms of bottom tier reactions, Overload and Swirl, I found them not very good. The main problem I have with Overload is that with all the reactions we trigger, enemies end up flying away and you'll spend a lot of time chasing down enemies with Razor, lowering his potential DPS. And while Swirl is fine, I don't find the utility to be nearly as efficient as either Superconduct or Electrocharged. It's more of a byproduct of what really helps with damage output, and that is a 4-piece Veneer set. The last reaction we could talk about is Crystallize, but if I'm being honest, there's almost no reason to use this reaction as of yet, and especially not to focus on it, so for now, we won't even bother. Next, we'll take a look at resonances, and again, we have one that's head and shoulders above the others. Electro Resonance should always be a priority. I would almost go as far as to say that if you don't have another Electro hero on your team, you're doing it wrong. It's actually kind of insane how much of an increase in damage Razor has when his burst is up, so having this resonance is going to ensure that if it's not on cooldown, he's already got it activated. The next two are almost on par with each other in terms of power, though I do put the Cryo Resonance higher in terms of priority, because, as we spoke about before, I'm not a huge fan of Pyro heroes paired with Razor, with the exception of one, who we'll get to later. Because Razor doesn't have the benefit of getting huge damage off his reactions like a Diluc would with Melt or Vaporize, we need to make sure Razor is hitting consistently with crits and hitting hard. So, if we can find ways to raise his crit outside of his artifacts, we can spend more of our resources on increasing his crit damage. The other 3 resonances I don't find particularly enticing and would not go out of my way to build a comp with them. Now, with that out of the way, let's jump into team compositions. First up, we have my current best in slot team, the one that I use 95% of the time. The first thing I want to talk about is the Razor Fischl pair, as we'll be seeing this combination across almost all of our compositions. I'm only going to make mention of this once, but keep in mind that the reasoning will be the same for every future team. Razor's overall DPS gets an enormous boost whenever he uses his burst, so because of this, we want to basically always have access to it when it comes off of cooldown. Fischl plays a 2-part role in this. First, as an Electro hero, her skill and burst will generate electro particles that, when either on or off the field, will generate more energy for Razor. Second, she provides Electro Resonance, further increasing the amount of electro particles we can generate from our elemental reactions. That's also not to mention the incredible consistency she can trigger Superconduct, especially when ultimately reaching Constellation 6, which is when her potential as a support truly unlocks. But that's not to say that we need to get her to Constellation 6 in order for her potential to be fully realized. However, if you don't have access to a Fischl, Elisa will be your best alternative, and you'll see that through basically every composition that has a Fischl on it. Next, we have Kaya, who has truly surprised me as of recently. In my experience, he is the best cryo support, specifically when talking about applying cryo to enemies and needing to maintain physical damage. Chongyun is technically better at keeping consistent cryo damage on the field. However, since his skill turns all normal attacks into cryo damage, he'll negate any physical damage bonus percentages we have built into Razor, essentially creating a counter-synergistic comp. Constellation 2 is where we want to focus getting Kaya as a support, as this significantly increases the uptime potential on his burst, leading to a theoretical 100% uptime. Since Razor wants to get up close and personal with his enemies, surrounding him with a wall of ice means his enemies will consistently get hit with cryo damage, and he can turn those into superconduct procs by himself, increasing his overall DPS. This also helps with Razor's AoE weakness, as he doesn't have much potential here, allowing him to potentially damage enemies beside or behind him. Lastly, we have Diona, who's the most recent addition to this list and has recently knocked Chi-Chi off as the healer for this team. First off, I think that Chi-Chi is still an incredibly powerful unit. Her burst heals are simply unmatched. The fact that she can heal your entire team on her own just with her skill is impressive, but her talismans are where her heals get nutty, because they essentially make your main carry unkillable for their entire uptime. However, as a cryo support, she's lacking in the elemental damage department. Her skill has a very long cooldown, which granted we can mitigate if we use her with a sacrificial sword, which would also lead to more burst as we'd then be building her for energy recharge. But in terms of continuous cryo damage, I've found that she's not as consistent as Diona. Diona is also preferred because, as of this point, the hardest content in the game, Spiral Abyss, specifically floors 9 and 12, have a strong focus on cryo enemies, so having a shield that's going to scale 250% on these floors will help counteract the loss of overall healing from moving away from Chi-Chi. Now, that's not to say that Diona's perfect. Her heals off her burst are somewhat slow, especially compared to a comparable ability like Bennett's burst, but she is easier to scale her heals over Chi-Chi in terms of investment, because her heals are based off her HP rather than attack. So rather than needing to get both a high character level and weapon level, plus maxing out a feather and most of your other artifacts on Chi-Chi, we don't need to focus as much on Diona's weapon, plus the fact that due to the higher stat pool, HP is going to scale faster with less investment, making Diona overall a cheaper character to build. Now, with that all said, even though she can't burst heal nearly as much as Chi-Chi, having access to a shield to mitigate some of the damage we take should help to reduce the amount of healing we need. The next team is essentially the same as the last, with the exception that we're now switching out our Kaya for a Hydro hero. My preference in this slot is Xingqiu over Mona. He's both easier to acquire and easier to play. His damage potential is incredibly high at higher constellations, but will work just fine if you only have the base character. His most important constellation will be his second one though, as this will increase the uptime of his burst from 15 to 18 seconds, leaving only 2 seconds we can't have his burst up. This substitution of a Hydro hero over a second Cryo hero is recommended for content in which you'll be encountering Pyro enemies, specifically those with shields such as floor 7 and 10 in Spiral Abyss. Since we don't need his damage extremely high, we're more focused on his Hydro element. This makes Xingqiu a cheap replacement, as a lot of investment isn't necessary. If you do have access to Mona though, her burst damage potential is extremely high, especially when paired with my favorite Catalyst support weapon, Thrilling Tales of Dragonslayer. As a 3-star weapon, it should be fairly easy to achieve max refinement, which will provide a 48% attack boost to whatever hero we switch into, which can be a deadly combo in tandem with her burst. It also means that her investment cost is very low, as the passive is what we care about most on this weapon, as opposed to leveling it up. Next, we have another Abyss floor-specific team. If you're having trouble with floors with enemies that don't stick together, floor 9 comes to mind, or a floor with lots of Pyro enemies leading to significant amounts of overloaded reactions, causing you to have to chase down enemies, this may be an alternative to the previous 2 teams you'll want to try out. The main difference here is the inclusion of an Anemo hero. Now, granted, Venti is the best at this. He can pretty much round up an entire floor and centralize your enemies. He is quite difficult to get though, especially if you missed him on his banner, but his investment necessity is very low, as we don't necessarily need him for damage, more for his overall utility. However, if you do invest heavily into him, his damage can just be outrageous, especially when he's equipped with a full 4-piece set of Viridescent Veneer. Razor isn't the best with dealing elemental damage, but between him and Fischl, you can make quite a big dent with your electro damage, or you can use Venti to spread around mass cryo damage and After Venti's burst ends, go to town with a whole lot of Superconduct triggers. A slight downside to this comp is that Razor is not the greatest unit to use with Venti, as he does have trouble reaching enemies caught in the vortex. If you do have any investment into your Fischl, Venti, or Diona's basic attacks, you'll have no problem keeping up the damage here. Now, you could replace Venti with any of the other Anemo heroes in the game. I have prioritized these in terms of who I find best from top to bottom, Sucrose being the best alternative. While Jean is super impressive and the Anemo main character is fine, a big deterrent for these two is that their skill and burst for the main character pushes enemies away from you, which is a significant problem for Razor, as you'll be spending a lot of time chasing down enemies, and in fact is the opposite of what we're trying to achieve with this comp. Next up is honestly one of my least favorite Razor comps. However, even if I don't like it, there are more uses for this team than those we'll talk about later. The key factor of this team is that we'll be utilizing Pyro units as our supports. I would only advise using a composition like this where the Pyro element is absolutely necessary. Again, like floor 9 or 12. The main factor I don't like about this team is the abundance of overload triggers you'll proc. Enemies will go flying all over the place and you'll be forced to chase them down, causing you to lose overall DPS and stamina, which could end up costing you a very expensive dodge, especially in later levels of Abyss. Now, that's not to say this team is all negatives, however. We know having access to the Pyro Resonance gives our full team a 25% attack boost, which is certainly a luxury. Also, having access to Bennett means a significant damage boost if we can keep Razor healthy, or if you have Bennett's first constellation. On top of being a huge DPS boost for Razor, Bennett will also be our primary healer. The brand new Xinyan has replaced Zhongli from what this comp was originally in the last video. Xinyan is simply a better supporting character, especially for Razor. Her shield will help protect your Razor, so you can just basically throw him into a mess of enemies without having to worry as much about taking damage, while also providing a 15% physical damage boost to Razor. If you can get her up to her Constellation 4 though, she'll further reduce enemies' physical resistance by 15% if she hits them with her E. If you don't have access to either Xinyan or Zhongli, although Zhongli is free, but for whatever reason, you could also use Amber, although she is significantly worse in applying any kind of Pyro element, and overall doesn't really provide any utility that the other two units already do, so I would stray away from her if at all possible. Our next comp features one of the newer heroes to the Genshin Impact scene. If you were so lucky to get Childe, this is how I would look to implement Razor on his team, or vice versa, Childe on Razor's team. Regardless, this team functions as two teams of 3 essentially. Childe, Fischl, Bennett, and Razor, Fischl, Bennett. Childe's kit is pretty complicated to build a team around because there's so much push and pull as to how long you should use a skill versus the cooldown time that results. Because of this, we'll want a secondary carry that can provide a bulk of the damage while Childe recovers. A big downside to this team though is that it's very expensive. Instead of only having one carry that we want to maximize our investment in, now we have 2. And if you're thinking about taking on later stages of the Abyss, now we're talking 3, and costs can get out of hand quite quickly. All that said, I currently have Bennett as the best healer for this team because he perfectly fits in the middle of accessibility and how much investment he needs to make him work to his full potential, which truthfully is not that much. Originally, I had Diona as the main healer, but because that would be a third bow user, I decided to go with Bennett instead to diversify our weapon set. Plus, we don't have an absolute need for Superconduct because only half of our carries will care about a physical damage reduction. Bennett can also benefit from Hydra that Childe has no problem spreading around, dealing massive damage with multiple Vaporize triggers. Chi-Chi or Barbara could also fit into the spot, though because Chi-Chi suffers from accessibility issues and are less in need of cryo, she gets bumped down. Barbara's heals can be quite effective, but she doesn't provide the overall damage that Bennett can. If you use her though, her best weapon will be Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, as we talked about earlier with Mona. That 48% attack increase, if you can get it fully refined, will be a significant buff that we would be losing if we don't go with Bennett. Lastly, before we get to our free-to-play team, since I know there will be at least one person asking for it, of course we'll make a team with the newest hero we have access to, Zhongli. In order to get max usage out of Zhongli, we'll want to make sure that we have access to the Geo Resonance to further boost Razor's damage. This comp is less focused on absolutely maximizing Razor's damage. While his damage will still be very high tier, this comp will be a bit more tailored to increasing his longevity and tankiness through shields, which is why again, I want to prioritize Diona as our healer. Because we have so many shields being created in this comp, it's not as important to have direct access to fast burst heals from the likes of Chi-Chi or Bennett. We'll also want to prioritize keeping shields up to take full benefit from the Geo resonance. The reason I've chosen the Geo main character over our other Geo choices, Ningguang or Noelle, is mainly because of the first constellation, which will increase the crit chance of any hero standing in the center of the Geo MC's burst by 10%. In addition, it will reduce stagger even more than just from the Geo resonance, which will help Razor out further as he's susceptible to stagger due to his long attack times. Ningguang would be my second choice in the slot, as she can provide Jade screens to protect our backs or fronts from any potential range damage that we would be normally weak to. She can also carry the Dragon Slayer Catalyst to drastically improve Razor's damage, as we are losing the potential of quick repetitive bursts due to losing the Electro Resonance. Or you can just build her with a really high crit rate and do some massive damage with her burst. Now, I've specifically not included Noelle in this comp, as I don't think she provides enough utility in the supporting role. Yes, she does create a shield, but she lacks an energy recharge, which we need to maximize, but she also has no way to directly amplify Razor's damage other than the bonus from Geo Resonance. Her heals are also not nearly enough to consider including her, plus the fact that if the shield should break, she loses the ability to heal, but also there will be a significant DPS loss having to have Razor removed from the field to have Noelle be our attacker to heal up the team. In my opinion, she's just not worth the slot, and the two previous Geo characters mentioned should be the priorities. Finally, we come to our free-to-play team. This team is not as focused as some of the other teams already mentioned previously, though it does borrow a lot of the same concepts. You'll notice that I have Lisa in the second slot over Fischl. I have a feeling a lot of you will say that Fischl is free to play, as everyone who played during the Unreconciled Stars event has had access to at least one copy of her for free. However, because there are or will be players who did not participate in the event, I'll maintain that Lisa is the best free-to-play option unless you do have a Fischl, by which of course it would benefit you to replace Lisa. Kaya still remains on the team as our best and only cryo support for a free-to-play account, and the only real healer we have access to is Barbara, unless you were lucky enough to buy Bennett while he was in the Starglitter shop. Now, of course, these heroes are all subject to change depending on what heroes you have, as I'm sure even free-to-play players will be spending some of their hard-earned primos on wishes. However, I can't rightly assume that you have access to every hero in the game, so this is ground zero. This team can of course be adjusted, but use your best judgment or inspiration from teams that we've talked about previously to influence your decision about how to adjust this team further. Lastly, I want to address the heroes that were not included on any of these teams, and specifically why they don't work well with Razor. First, we have Diluc, Klee, and Keqing. These all fall into the same reasoning that these are not supporting characters, but carries in and of themselves. You'll actually be losing overall DPS by going with one of these heroes rather than another of the same element that we've already spoken of. What makes a good support is that they leave something behind to do damage, like Fischl's Oz or Xingqiu's Rain Swords, which these heroes just don't do. If you want to use them, I suggest building a second team with one of these three heroes as your main carry. Beidou suffers from just being far too similar to Razor, creating redundancies that we just don't need. She's also not nearly as good at generating energy as Fischl. Chongyun, as we discussed earlier, is in fact anti-synergistic with Razor, turning all his basic attacks into cryo attacks as opposed to physical, removing any physical damage bonuses he may have, including the bonuses he gets from Ascension. Finally, Noelle. As we discussed during the Geo team, Noelle suffers as a support character not being able to sufficiently generate energy, and even though she can provide heals, she is one of the weakest healers we have access to, and our DPS will significantly drop off since we need her to stay on the battlefield the entire time we need her to heal. She also provides no direct damage boost to Razor. So guys, that was my new and improved team building guide for Razor. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you have any further questions, make sure to leave those down in the comment section below. I will try and get to all questions that come in, as Razor is my main boy. I do love when people also enjoy playing Razor. He's just one of the most fun characters for me personally. If you liked what you saw and you want to see more content from me, you can head over to my Twitch page, twitch.tv/xjazze. Give us a follow over there, or you can subscribe right here on YouTube by clicking that red subscribe button. Like the video if you liked it, and click that notification bell, that way you never miss a video. And if you want to join our community over on Discord, link will be down in the description. But guys, that's all I have for the video today. Hopefully you did enjoy, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.